Ready for tech that reflects the global world? Welcome to our podcast, The Global Code. We go beyond the buzzwords to explore real world tech solutions for and with everybody, everywhere in the age of AI. I'm your host, Dr. Salima Bhimani, Maven of Moonshots, and here are my co hosts, Dr. Shadan Deleveaux, G Force of Talent, and Ashish Pujari, the Masters of Engineer. I'm going to pass it over to Ashish to introduce our incredible guest today.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Olivia Gamblin as our guest. She is the author of the book Responsible AI: Implement an Ethical Approach in Your Organization. She is one of the first movers in responsible AI. She's a world-renowned expert in AI ethics and product innovation whose experience in utilizing ethics by design has empowered hundreds of business leaders in industries ranging from Fortune 100 to startups. She helps business leaders achieve their desired impact on the cutting edge of AI development. Welcome, Olivia. And as a fun fact, you have shared with us, which I'm sure many of our listeners would love. You spend half of your time in San Francisco. I mean, the better half, the winters in San Francisco and summers in Brussels. So tell us something about that.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having me here today. And I am in Brussels today. If anyone's wondering what part of the world I'm in, it's a fun game to play. But I have that split both for professional and personal reasons. Professionally, San Francisco is still that hub for everything AI, while Brussels is the hub for everything AI policy, which is obviously having a great impact on the space right now. And then personally speaking, my family's all out in California. And what I like to call my second family is all here on the European side. So I have conveniently built a life in two places, I like to say.
You're living the dream for some people. Like, come on, you're eating European food.
Yes, that's amazing.
And you get to have the California sun. I mean, that's pretty good.
Well, you say that as we're in August and there's another rainstorm in Brussels. So yes, I go to California for the sun.
Listen, is there any better combination than Belgian chocolate and California wine?
Oh my God, best. Exactly, it's a dream.
Just super excited to chat with you today and just learn so much about your background and what you're working on and all those things. But Ashish, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to start with the book, right? So you released it in the start of the year, and can you walk us through what you want to communicate through the book? And during our research, we came across a story about carpenters, so maybe we can also touch upon that.
And congratulations, by the way, on the book and being on a book tour. Like, that is wild. You are doing amazing things. Thank you so much for having the book out there for the world to receive. It's amazing.
Thank you. It is wild. That's a great way to describe it. This is my first book. I am already, the book was just published in June. It was released worldwide. And so I am only 2 months out of having this book out and I'm already working on the second one. So if that says anything about me, I don't know what else will. But the first book, and I really ought to put the copy. I've got a copy across the room from me and I should put the copy right next to me so I can hold it up and give proof now that it's there. It's real. But this book itself, Responsible AI, really is a playbook. I treated this book as a foundational piece. So when it comes to responsible AI and just AI in general, good practices around AI, it's not only a technical problem that we're looking at. Quite often we're looking at an operational problem as well within the entire organization. So we're not just looking at the technical infrastructure, we're looking at the people and process underneath it all. And the challenge that I was finding my clients running across over and over again was being able to visualize how that all works together. Because it can kind of feel like, oh my goodness, there's so many different pieces that we have to keep track of. We've got the NIST framework over here. We've got educational pieces over here. We've got data management and in a whole nother department. How do I actually get a visual on what all I need to be doing? Where do I start? What am I missing? So that's really what this book covers. Where do you start? What are you missing from A to Z? How do you build out an AI strategy, an operational AI strategy that's built on those responsible foundations? And the reason it's a foundational book is all of my work now that is building off the top of this, you kind of need some of these practices in place to be able to make any kind of change. So that really became, it's been a catalyst for a lot of my work now happening and for work to come and currently. So it's been a great book. But the carpenter story actually is the story that kicks off the first chapter. And it's just basically giving an idea of how to train different things. So the book is not about training specific actions. The book is training on a tool, giving you information about a tool. And so I use the story of a carpenter and different ways that carpenters learn basically carpentry. Granted, I'm not a carpenter, so I could be making some of this up, but just to highlight the difference between ethics is not specific actions, responsible AI is not specific actions, it's more of a tool and how to conceptualize that.
Yeah, and you have a values-based framework that goes along with the book. Can you talk a little bit more about, like, where do you feel the relevance of a values-based framework comes into what you're talking about? Because you're talking about what I would call like an operational integration, right? Of how do you get an organization to integrate a responsible AI point of view, perspective, approach, but at the same time make it work so that it actually has an application, correct?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
what you're talking about there is the values canvas.
Mhm.
And think of it this way. So we all know that fairness is important when it comes to AI. We hear all these problems around bias. We're looking at bias mitigation. We're trying to implement fair practices in the development and adoption of AI, right?
Mm.
When you hear, let's do fairness, what do you do? What do you think? Where do you even start? How does that look like? So what the values canvas does is it maps all of the different places that you need some type of solution that will embed fairness into your practices. So instead of saying, we're going to do fairness, let's, I guess, look at some metrics and see what we're doing. What the values canvas enables you to do is sit down and go, okay, these are the places that we're missing some type of either fairness check or practice or education or communication. It maps that all out for you. The reason it's called the values canvas and not the fairness canvas is it works for any of these values that we're talking about in AI. So fairness, transparency, accountability, trust, privacy, all of these terms that we can use sometimes as buzzwords. It can kind of feel like, well, what does that actually mean? The values canvas translates it into practical action and shows you exactly when and where that needs to go into place. This specific value that you are working with, that you know is leading to some type of business impact or objective for your AI products and tools.
No, thank you for that overview. I think that's incredibly interesting and just an amazing backdrop and landscape to think about. I was wondering a bit more specifically, can you help our listeners understand exactly what it is that you do? And I realize that may be a bit hard to quantify because I feel like you're almost a multi-hyphenate status, but just tactically, what is it that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try and get as detailed as possible, but I have to start a little bit vague. So bear with me here. But essentially, think of it as I sit at the intersection of human values and artificial intelligence. So my work is focusing specifically on how to either adopt or develop AI in a way that reflects our human values. What that looks like on a day-to-day depends on what context I'm working in. So if I'm working in AI adoption, a lot of the work that I do is on use case design. So what is a good use of an AI tool, especially with all of these generative AI tools now available? What does that actually look like when you're integrating it into your teams, when well-being of your employees is a top priority? That's a value, for example. That's on the adoption side versus if we're looking at development. I work with something called ethics by design techniques. So I'm working with design teams focusing on how do we designed specifically for human values in a way that creates a competitive edge. So how do we not make, let's say, we'll use fairness again. How do we use fairness not as, say, a check to make sure that we're not doing anything wrong, but instead use it as a design feature where people come to the product or come to use our AI product because they know that it's fair for X, Y, and Z reasons. So I know that's still a little bit vague, but hopefully it gives a little bit more of a description. I also do a lot of thinking and writing in this space, so it's still a lot of awareness and education in responsible AI and ethics in general.
No, I think that does a great job of just illuminating it. In kind of like all great answers, it opens up a plethora of additional questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you actually, Shadan, I love what you're saying because what it made me think is like, could you describe a use case of it, Olivia? That might be helpful for folks to like understand what you're kind of ground what you're saying a bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful? Let's see. I can do adoption. I can do development. It's there's so many
You
different.
choose.
Yeah, gosh. Okay. Hey, dealer's choice. This always makes it hard because I have so many ones that come to mind that
Adoption. Let's do adoption. Let's do adoption.
adoption. Okay. So right now, a fun one is actually looking at adoption of AI tools in HR management and hiring processes. So the HR industry has been slow to adopt AI, frankly. They've been hesitant despite the amount of startups that are developing AI products and tools for HR. There's a lot of hesitancy because we've seen the use cases like Amazon's HR hiring fiasco with their AI tools. So we've seen these massive scale, this has gone wrong, which has led HR in itself to be hesitant in adoption. They're dealing with people's futures. So when it comes to adoption of actually utilizing these AI tools in the hiring process, a good use case is, and I have to speak a little bit vaguely here again, but sitting down with an HR team and looking at their entire process for interviewing, start to finish. So how do we intake? How do you source actual applicants? How do you go through the first round of review on those applications? How do you pull out who gets moved to the next interview? Or is that next interview a video? Are you connecting with other people in the company? So on and so forth. Where do the questions come from? What kind of techniques are you using? It's it can be quite a complex process. And so sitting down and looking at that entire process when it comes to AI adoption, when I'm doing the responsible AI aspects, what I'm looking at is where are the points in that process that are greatest reward, least risk. So where are the AI tools furthest developed? So for example, any type of AI that comes into emotion recognition or facial recognition, that technology is not developed far enough. That's a lot of risk that you're going to be taking into your process. So that's high risk, little return in terms of the actual adoption of that kind of tool. You're going to be looking at that going, we're really going to have to watch this tool. And the thing that we're getting in return, we're not quite sure what the actual return on investment is going to be here. Versus on an opposite end, if you are looking at, say, a tool to help just with the first review of applications, say CV and basic basic interest statements, then the AI tools in that aspect have been much further developed and it's lower risk. So really what they're doing, that there's been more testing, there's been less cases actually of negative feedback there. So that's a low risk versus high return because of the mass amount of applications that come in. So you're able to hopefully sort through the weeds and be able to pull out so that the people that are giving the first round of interviews have less of a bulk of a manage to actually go through. They can spend more time with each applicant. That's just kind of walking through a very, very basic example of what it looks like when you're looking at that full adoption, start to finish in terms of a process, and finding the places that low risk, high return, and how does that adoption work?
And then are you layering the potential value or the values on top of that? And I think even this, especially when you're thinking about hiring processes, right? Fairness and equity and all of those things come into play very quickly. So is that part of this process as well?
Exactly, exactly. So once the use case has been selected, so let's say it's for using that review of the first round of applications, then we're looking at, okay, what are our primary values here? And if we're looking at it being, let's say, fairness, well-being, and transparency, then what we'll be looking at there is, okay, fairness wise, what kind of checks and balances, either in our processes or in the technology, do we have in place for us to be able to catch applications that are outliers that we wouldn't necessarily choose now, but we would be interested in exploring? So someone that doesn't match the typical profile, but could potentially be a good fit for the company. What kind of, again, processes or in the technology can we actually put into place there so that we're able to catch some different applications coming through? It's also looking at questions of like what kind of what kind of testing has that product been under to ensure that it's not filtering out for there's for example biases in word choice, or biases in position title. So what kind of checks and balances are within the technology itself? Pull that out. I'm looking at fairness there. Well-being itself could be looking at, well, if there are hundreds and hundreds of applications coming in, the person that has to review that, how do we make sure that they're taken care of and that this tool is supporting them in their work? And transparency, well, how do we make sure that there is some type of transparent communication with the applicants as well as internal to know where their application is at, instead of sitting in that black hole of just sending things out and out and out and hoping that you eventually hear back without anything coming back towards you. So that was, again, super quick. But what would happen in that case is we have the use case. We've we've done some other work on actually selecting the values that we want into place. But what we start to do is then layer those values over that use case and go, okay, this is where they're coming into action.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right, Olivia. So just to switch gears here a little bit, you mentioned that you're in Brussels right now. Can you give us some insight into, what's going on in AI policy in the EU region?
Yeah. So the EU AI Act is now in effect. So what that means is companies are now scrambling to start to put the regulation into place. The challenge right now is it's not necessarily clear how to comply with this new regulation. So similar to what happened with the GDPR, the data privacy, massive reason why we have cookies consent and everything with Europe, GDPR went into effect without clear processes or routes to actual compliance. So now we're having that same wave with the EU AI Act, where it's far more comprehensive than the GDPR. It's much more strict in terms of its auditing and documentation processes. What that looks like in action, companies are trying to understand, and what that looks like as well for a startup versus a large enterprise. Where does that all fit? So right now, it's a lot of almost sitting and waiting to see how this actually impacts companies. The great example from the GDPR is when that went into effect, we weren't predicting that we would get all of those constant cookie consent, having to agree and to sharing your cookies on the websites. But that was one of the impacts of that regulation. So right now we're sitting and waiting for seeing, okay, what's going to come out of this new round.
But do you think this was a step maybe taken too hastily, or did we need more time, or is it just how this goes? You just do something and then learn along the way.
Probably a little bit of both. It was definitely time to have some robust regulation in place. The EU took the first step. The criticism from to the EU, though, is that it was developed in what we call the Brussels bubble. So just like you have the Silicon Valley bubble, you have a Brussels bubble where there is a hyper fixation on the regulation and the different controls that can go into place here without necessarily an understanding of what's happening in industry, specifically in technology. We all know that Europe is not necessarily leading in AI, and yet they are leading in the regulation of AI. So from my perspective, I think the current regulations are incredibly strict. It's going to be very difficult to get these into place in a way that's going to drive the impact that the regulators were hoping for. So I think we're going to see a lot of odd side effects because of the level of intensity that this regulation's written at.
Olivia, could you give us an example of like what is a regulation that, you think might fall into that category of too strict? And then what is like a side effect that you think could happen?
Mm. So one of the aspects of the EU AI Act is there are different risk categories. And so those risk categories are focused more on the technology and less on the use case. So what that means is something like a recommendation algorithm is classified actually as I believe, low risk. Last time I checked. To be honest, this regulation, there is constant change. So I'm still actually going back through the final version of it now. But recommendation algorithms, right? They are, I believe, classified as low risk without any connection to the actual context that they're being applied in. So in some cases, a recommendation algorithm is low risk, like it's recommending, I don't know, the vegetable of the month to buy. I'm making something up, but something that seems fairly harmless. It's giving a recommendation. You can follow it or not. Your life's not depending on it. And it could be of interest. It could not be. Is low risk. So the level of documentation and auditing is actually non-existent in terms of requirements. It's all voluntary. Any type of responsible AI practices are all voluntary, encouraged, but voluntary. However, that same kind of recommendation algorithm, not in the context of recommending the vegetable that you buy this week at the store, a recommendation algorithm can instead be used in the context of recommending, let's say, well, since we have the elections right around the corner, recommending what political articles you are getting shown on your news feed. And as we all know, that can highly affect the outcome of an election. That recommendation algorithm, though, is still classified as low risk because it's a recommendation algorithm. So it does not have the same guardrails on it that, say, a high-risk technology such as facial recognition does. So that's the part where I'm looking at seeing there's some holes there that will be interesting to deal with that, from my experience, the context that a model is applied into has far more impact than the actual technology of the model itself. So that's really where I'm going to be watching is the discrepancies that start to happen there.
Just to follow off of that example, right? Recommendation engine. Um, again, at the end of the day, the consumers are end users. So would it be fair to say that if it works for people, they will use it, otherwise they will not, right? So why not let end users be the determinants of what is success and what is failure, right? So what do you have to say about that?
I think in some ways that definitely rings true in a very crowded market as we have. There's a lot of options for different types of technology. I think, though, in other cases, we have large tech companies that provide services and products that you have to use. For example, smartphones. You can't function without one nowadays, or it's very, very difficult to function without a smartphone. So, for example, my screen on my iPhone the other week just completely went out, and I'm stuck in the middle of San Francisco with no directions. And I'm sat there going, well, thank God at least I have a weird obsession with refusing to use maps when I move into a city and I learn a city. Otherwise, I would have been stuck. And even from then, I was like, okay, I don't know parking. San Francisco parking is a whole mystery in of itself. I have an app that tells me if I can park where I'm parked. Can't get access to that. Can't get access. I had my Apple Wallet. Of course, I didn't have my wallet on me that day. So all of a sudden I'm locked out of being able to engage with society. And so it's that kind of technology where it's so integral with how we function that it's not it the user doesn't have the ability to vote with their feet. They don't have the ability to say, no, I don't want to use that. So if common practice for smartphones is you have to start paying a premium to lock your data into that phone to make it a closed network instead and a decentralized system rather than a centralized system. And I have no other option other than to do that. If that just becomes standard across smartphones, but I don't like that. I don't have the option to say, no, I'm going to go find a different solution. So to answer your question, yes and no. There are definitely cases where users can vote with their feet and say, I don't like this product. I'm going to go use a different one that better aligns with my values. There are cases though now where technology is so ingrained with how we function on a day-to-day that technology is really the one that needs to be watched closely and to have the guardrails on.
I'm wondering, especially because you spend so much time split between Brussels and SF, as you were saying, if you're seeing a difference in attitude towards policy and regulation in Europe versus the U.S., and if you mind just highlighting that in terms of what you're seeing.
Yes. It's really fascinating being split between these two right now. On the European side, Europeans are used to having more regulation. The EU has far more strict regulation and policies than the US. So for Europeans, it's natural. You say, okay, we've got a new regulation. We have to follow it. This is important. We follow this. It keeps us in line. From the European standpoint, that's creating this fear of AI going wrong. So this fear that we're going to put it into place and it's going to do something bad, or that it gets out of our control, or that we don't have the right controls in place. On the US side, the US side is much more Wild West. So although I do hear people say, oh, the EU AI Act is coming in, that will save us. It becomes this kind of odd, this will save us. There are people that default in the States to saying that regulation will give us that baseline that we need. But for the most part, I've had this conversation over and over again with companies saying, fine, we just won't expand into the European market. We're going to continue development and we're going to follow what needs to be followed in the US, but that's Europe. We don't really need that. It's not our market, or it's not it's not impacting us. In the US, that creates a different fear, this fear of being left behind. If we're not using or adopting or building AI now, we are already behind. So it's an odd dichotomy of fear happening on both sides of the Atlantic, and that's reflected into that feeling and approach and sentiment towards these regulations.
Do you feel, Olivia, though, that like on the European side, because we've been talking to folks that, across the globe about what's happening in the tech space and with AI. And, one of the things that's coming up is you've got sort of the European context that you're describing pretty clearly, right? Where the AI regulation is there and, people are ready to adopt and fall into line. And then you've got the, American context where, in reality, like, more than 60% of innovation is happening, right? So in the AI space. So we're talking about the different context in terms of what's happening with the technology itself, right? In terms of development and deployment.
Yeah.
And then you've got other parts of the world, like we talked to somebody from the African continent, and and there it's like you're at the very beginnings of like regulation and technology development. So I think my curiosity here is like in this feels like a matrix of
Yes.
very different dynamics and very different regional contexts. How do we ensure that we are headed forward in this world of like AI technology, which I loved what you did earlier, by the way, because I think you demystified this idea that AI is taking over everything. Because I
Yes.
think general populations have that point of view, because that's what we often hear in news reports. So I love what you just did earlier. But how do we ensure that, we are making the most of this technology across the world um, at a pace that's going to make sense? Because it just feels like people are at very different points in the process of designing, deploying, adopting, and it just feels like it's a bit of whack-a-mole is what it feels like. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I feel like that's what I'm getting. Tell me if I'm getting that wrong.
Yes, you are not alone. Everyone feels like it's whack-a-mole. It's it depends on the day. You wake up and you're going, okay, well, what is it today? What are we dealing with
Yeah.
today when it
Yeah.
comes to AI? It's coming from all these different directions. I think in order to look at the bigger picture, and honestly, a lot of my current work, my next rounds of research and the next book and everything are focused in this direction. What I've noticed is there is almost this in AI, this I'm going to use the word obsession here, actually. There's almost this obsession with technical innovation for the sake of technical innovation. Let's keep innovating on the tech, keep going and going and going for the sake of quite literally just technical innovation. We'll figure out what to do with it later, or we'll just throw it to the general public and they'll find a use case for it. Oh, what we're noticing with generative AI is that doesn't work. There's actually very surprisingly lower numbers of adoption rates on generative AI than you would think, because there's not necessarily a clear use of it. So what I'm looking at is, instead of this technical innovation for the sake of technical innovation and keep pushing to see where it goes and we'll find a reason for it later, what I'm looking at is actually going back to the roots of where AI started, which is all around generating human impact. So instead of starting with how do we push innovation in AI, looking at how do we push innovation in human impact? What impact are we trying to drive here? And then how do we match our technical creativity to that actual desired impact? So for me, from my perspective, and the work that I'm on, I'm trying to shift that conversation from innovation happening on a technical level to innovation happening on the impact level itself and designing there. Yeah, I kind of sidestepped a little bit around your question there, Salima, but what it comes down to is right now, companies, countries, and individuals across the board, I'm going to say something controversial, slow down your adoption, not in the sense of everything, like we have to slow it down or AI is going to take over. No, slow it down and actually take the time to ask, what do I want to get out of this? So as an individual user, do I have to use AI in every single part of my life? No. Actually, to me, that doesn't sound that sounds terrible, to have to use AI every single step of the way. To wake up in the morning and ask ChatGPT, how should I brush my teeth? No, thank you. I don't need that. But it takes that level of self-awareness on an individual level to say, where does this fit into my life? How does this complement my life? It takes that awareness and on an organizational level of, where does this fit best into our operations? Where does this actually work for us versus it being something that, it's shiny and we need to adopt it? When you're customer facing, do our customers actually need this? Are they asking for a feature like this? Or are we just trying to add AI so that we don't look like we're an old behemoth of a company? And on a country level, we're looking at a country level too. What actually is reflective of the culture of this of a country, of our communities? Where does AI complement? So when I say slow down, it's not slow down, don't adopt, it's terrible. No, it's take the moment to actually assess how can AI complement my life? How can AI complement what I'm doing? Just taking a quick breath there and asking that question instead of saying, I need to adopt it everywhere, that already shifts it into where is this useful and and where is it going to bring good benefit for me? Yeah.
So Olivia, when you say that, right, and I don't know what ChatGPT is since we are in Google, it's all Gemini. Uh,
How do I brush my teeth?
but when in the business world, especially in San Francisco, if you say slow down, I mean that's it. That means you're outdated. So how do you communicate that idea where for business people, slow down doesn't sound like get outdated?
True. Well, I have to say, typically I don't use the words slow down. I usually don't say it's time to slow down. It's more of, I speak about it in terms of strategy. So I'm looking at saying, hey, this is all great. We've got great technology. We want to move fast. Yes. What's the strategy that's going to get it into place faster? How are we actually going to be able to adopt this faster? Instead of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks, what needs to be put in place so that the innovation and the adoption or development speeds up? So I actually talk about it in terms of speeding things up even more, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but think of it as like building think of it as like I hand you a bucket of Legos and I say, okay, go build me a house. You're going to sit there, you're going to, poke around and build a house, and it might take a little while. It'll be fun, but it's going to take a while, right? Versus what if I handed you that same bucket of Legos and instructions that actually said, okay, you need these sets in this color, and this is how it gets put together. You're going to be able to build that house much faster. So that's how I try and position these responsible practices, is just giving you instructions to be able to move faster. You can still add in the creativity, you can still add in different colors to the house or different features to that Lego house, but you're now able to get to that point much faster because you had the instructions in place to start with. And then, if that still doesn't work, it's challenging a little bit of the ego of everyone wants to do things differently. Okay, well, doing things differently means taking a pause and asking yourself what you're doing in the first place.
Yeah, that's I mean, the Lego example definitely makes it more clear. So, if I am a business person, so one thing you're telling me is you need a strategy uh, to help you move even faster, right? Which is good to hear. Second thing you're telling me is having a use case based approach and not just innovation for the sake of innovation. Any other things that you would like an entrepreneur to know to help them navigate, this industry of like super rapid change?
Yes, I would add in one last piece, and that was a fantastic summary, Ashish. I'm going to have you be my spokesperson. This is what summarize my thoughts and everything for me. The part that I would add in there is AI and responsible AI. So I talk about these one and the same. You either have risky AI or you have responsible AI. There's no really in between here. And we do have best practices established that can lead you towards that responsible direction. It always leads back to the people. Always. It comes back down to the people building. It comes back down to the people leading the concepts. It comes back down to the users. So when something's not necessarily working with the tool, to trace back and find where the root of that problem is in the people. Not saying that people are the problem, but instead saying, is there enough education happening? Do our teams know how to use these tools? Is communication happening around the build or use of these tools? Are they motivated around them? Do they have the right governance processes in place? Do they know what they're doing there? Or looking at users as well. Is this the right use case? Do people function like this? Or is this something that's too foreign to them or is counter to what their actual needs and wants are? So when you are facing a challenge in AI, I challenge you to instead try and find where that root of that challenge is in the people.
I love this approach. I feel like we've had multiple guests speak about AI and things like that, and even responsible AI, but I've never heard this much of a people-centric focus on AI. And I feel that if people spoke more with this people-centric focus, it would take a lot of the fear around the topic away from folks who just are casual listeners and observers. So thank you for keeping people the main thing.
I kind of like people. I think we're cool. I think we're really interesting. See, I also come from a background in philosophy. So my default is always asking why. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Philosophy major undergrad. It changed my life. I love it.
Thank you. I always tell people that too.
Changed my life. Salima, I know that we probably just have a couple minutes left, and so I want to kick it back over to you for any final questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Shan. Olivia, this has been really insightful. My goodness. We had one more, I think one last question, which is really around this question of the users. And I think that, if we come back down to this kind of concept of responsibility that you're talking about, and I think you're also talking about it slightly differently than the way that we've heard other people talk about it, in the sense that I think that the whole like sort of the binary between risk and responsibility is one that I think that you're again demystifying. Like it's not like risk is this like huge scary thing. It's the thing that's not going to be optimal, right? That's what I'm hearing you say, right? It's a thing that's not going to lead you where you want to go. And if you don't know where you want to go, let me help you figure out where you need to go, right? That's what I'm hearing you say. So on the user side, how do we ensure that users are not being held responsible for things that really should be in the design so
Mhm.
that, we're not kind of making, this is not all coming down to us to kind of regulate and figure out when, especially with AI, because this technology is powerful, right? And it's going to do things that are beyond what we have ever done.
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I wish there was a simpler answer. I think there's a few ways to tackle it because that is a challenge. That is a very big problem. And it's one that we don't have an answer for necessarily right now. For example, like you were saying with the seatbelts, we learned then, but we still don't necessarily have a solution for how this can work in technology. But I would say one of the best places to start is actually with AI literacy in general. So
Mm.
AI is often portrayed as, for example, I'm starting over then because I remember this conversation I had. The understanding of what AI is and is not for the general public. We all work in tech, obviously. So we have a much higher technical and AI literacy than someone on the street does. I was talking with someone the other day and they were talking about their use, sorry, of ChatGPT. I can substitute Gemini if you want if you want me to put the plug in there, but of ChatGPT, and he called it, oh, it's like a prophet. And immediately I thought, oh, that's not what it is. And that can actually be very problematic if that's your perception. And so that conversation led into me going, okay, well, talk to me. Why would you call it a prophet? What would that look like? Like, what are you giving me here? And he was all focused on, well, it gets me all these answers. And so I sat down and went, okay, well, here's where the answers are coming from. This is how it works. It's not like ChatGPT is a prophet getting spoken to and pulling information out of the sky. And he walked away going, oh, I this makes so much sense. And now I understand better like how to use it. And I realized that like I was kind of misusing it in this way. So why I gave that whole example to bring this back around is there's such a low AI literacy in general that it makes it very difficult for people to be able to push back and say, no, I'm not responsible for that. Or I don't know what I'm doing. People don't know what people don't know. And AI is portrayed as this like, well, I'm not a technical person. Therefore, like, I don't know what it is and I don't know how to use it. And so I don't know, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do. AI is not that difficult to understand. People that
Mhm.
truly understand the technology can explain it in ways that anyone can understand, through stories, through analogies, through basic explanations.
Right.
Getting more of that information out there and demystifying what AI is and is not, with respect to humanity, respect to the fact that you are still in control, that you are not giving your life over to AI. That, I think, is the first important step, because then people can have the awareness of saying, no, you do better. Like to car manufacturers for a seatbelt, no, you do better. I'm not taking
Yeah.
that responsibility. I don't
Right.
have the ability to. This is actually back on you. So a bit
Yeah.
back towards Ashish with voting with your feet, actually having that pushback. And in the technical world, and excuse me, in this digital world, we do have the ability to be more vocal about this. There is the ability for uh, digital communities to push back on companies and brands saying you do better.
Yeah. I love what you're saying because it's really about this dynamic shift. And on that point, you think you've shifted us in terms of our point of view and perspective as well. So thank you so much for giving us so much insight and being such a human-centered and people-centered technologist, because I think that we need more and more of that. I feel like all of us are in that category. And so it's lovely to meet a fellow what I call socio-technologists who care about not just the technology itself, but care about the impact that's having on people. Excited to talk to you again at some point if you are willing to come on.
Of course.
And I know that our listeners and viewers are going to get so much out of this conversation. Thank you so much, Olivia, for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I had a great time.
All right. What did you walk away with from that conversation?
Again, that was just incredible, incredible, incredible. Love her energy overall. Love the fact that she's a fellow philosophy major. I try to tell people, people are like, hey, what are you going to do with that philosophy major? Clearly, amazing things. I think the biggest thing for me, honestly, was just the human centeredness of her approach. We've talked to a few guests now around just responsible AI and things like that, and what it means and meaning different things to different people. But the fact that she's really keeping people at the center of her thoughts and really bringing organizations back to that as they're working on developing solutions, right? And so sometimes I feel like in business, organizations will develop solutions in search of problems. And it seems like her approach is very much, no, no, no. How do we have this human impact first? And then what's the best way to do that? So I love it.
Ashish, thoughts?
Um, yeah, I would say this conversation really reflects why we started this podcast with human centeredness, which we have not heard other people really talk about, and the use case based approach as to why
Mm,
we are using AI to solve a specific problem and not just innovate for the sake of innovation is like is something that resonated with me significantly.
yeah, me too. Like, I felt like the use case piece was really, really useful because it kind of, again, brought it down to earth, made it practical and really saw where the application could be. And if you're going to make the application, like, what are the risks and what are the rewards of doing that, right? Like, how do you make that choice and decision, um, knowing what you're going to get out of it by doing it? So I think that was really useful. I do think the place where I walked away thinking about, a question that I walked away thinking about is really, how do you shift the business incentives? And I think this is going to be the challenge, right? Because imagine in all of our work and in my own work, that has always been the case where if you are going to technology companies or part of technology companies where you're saying, hey, we need to shift the dynamic where this is not about technology first, this is really about impact or outcome first, right? On humans, you're really talking about a different business case and a different business approach than what I think big technology companies, at least, definitely startups as well, are incentivized to do, right? They're incentivized to build the technology and get it out there. So I think that along with what Olivia is doing, there's going to have to be, and then she talked about that, right? Like about telling people that in fact this is going to speed you up if you do it. So if that works as the angle, then I'm super excited to see where her work and the work of other people will go to help shape a new direction with technology companies on the impact and footprint they're going to have on the world. So I think there's possibility there that could be really interesting.
And she also has her book, so I'm curious what how she has outlined her ideas in there, in terms of what the framework looks like for responsible AI. Um, yeah, I guess we didn't get into the details of the story, but supposedly the way it goes is like you have two carpenters, and one is taught how to hammer a nail, the other one was taught, hey, here's a hammer, you can use it as X, Y, and Z, right? So then, as a test, one of the carpenters is said, remove a nail, right? And then the person who was taught, hey, use the hammer just to hit the nail on the head, couldn't figure out how to remove the nail because that's not what was taught. But the person who was taught about the tool was more prepared to remove a nail and not just like hit the nail on the head. So
Yeah.
that was like the story. So it's interesting how she made it real, where you learn about the tool and then you can figure out how to use it, rather than just say teach one aspect of it and then people just don't know anything else.
Yeah, no. But so I can't wait to see what the second book is about.
Yeah, me too. I think this was a really good add-on conversation to a lot of the other conversations we have had around responsible AI. So I'm looking forward to more. We've got more coming. So this is going to be super exciting for us to keep learning about this space and hearing from different people and different angles with which people are approaching AI in general, and then definitely the angle of responsibility. So super excited. We will have more for you, listeners and viewers, and we'll be seeing you all soon again.
All right.
Right. Take care,
All
guys.
right.